info@mheroes.com. We have a team that's manning both the chat feature and the emails, and then they will be sending that information to myself, and I'll do some juggling and see what kind of questions come our way that we can ask of Dr. Moore. So I'd like to get going and just introduce Dr. Thomas Moore, who's our first speaker for the Spotlight series. He's the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Care of the Soul. He's a prolific writer. He's written 20, 25, can't keep track of all the books that he has written and have been published. And he holds a Ph.D. in religious studies. He's a former university professor, a former monk. He currently travels internationally as a lecturer. Again, he's an author, a musician, and a psychotherapist. He has a new book that's coming out this spring in May of 2021. It's called Soul Therapy, the Art and Craft of Offering Caring Conversations. And so it's real timely in terms of him joining us a few months later at the Low Country Mental Health Conference. We're fortunate that he's going to be there this summer offering 2 talks and a book signing, and want to thank him for being a part of this today. So Dr. Moore, just want to welcome you and thanks for being here.
Thank you, David. I'm really happy to be with you today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I guess why don't we get started? I think probably a great starting point. The bio that I gave was so brief, but there were some interesting tidbits in there. And I figured maybe you can tell a little bit about your history and your journey towards, how you came about getting involved in the world of psychotherapy.
Yes, I left home when I was 13 to become part of a Catholic monastic community. Well, pretty monastic, like half monastic and half active. And so that affected me, and I still feel like I have a monk as part of my makeup. It's still there. And I think as a writer, it really serves me because I feel like I'm a monk there surrounded by my books and writing books. It's very rich. It was a very rich experience. I think I just sort of grew out of it in some ways, or I had to move on. And I had been studying music, so I got a degree in composition and then went to the University of Michigan and got another degree. And but I realized when I was studying music that my interests were broader in a way, that I was still interested in the theological questions and philosophy and that sort of thing. So I went to Syracuse University and did doctoral studies in religious studies. And the program there is very open, very interesting. And I was able to study Freud and Jung, as well as the world's spiritual traditions. And I didn't know at the time, but they made a terrifically rich and helpful bundle of things for me to become familiar with, really to study deeply. So that was very important to me. And I've always been grateful for what I got at Syracuse there. And also my intense study of Jung. I remember in my first year there, I read the collected works of Jung, the 20 volumes twice, just to really get it in me. And then since then, I've been reading it daily and regularly. But I'm not a Jungian analyst. I never wanted to do that. I think maybe when I explain it, I think that, I was a monk and I was in an organization and I kind of have done that. I like the idea of being a solitary writer. One of my models is Samuel Beckett, the Irish writer, who really did everything on his own. And I like that idea. I like now to be a writer, and I haven't created anything around me really, except to just be an author. And I do other things. I lecture and I teach, and I do a little bit of therapy in my own definition of that word. And so I taught at a psychology department for a year, and then went back to religious studies and taught religion and psychology until the university told me they didn't want me to stay. I was not given tenure. And mainly because they didn't like the way I was writing. I wouldn't write for the journals. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that. I tried, but I love to write, but I can't do it in the academic style. So it was good for me, and immediately discovered that people wanted me to be their therapist. And I had studied counseling psychology at Syracuse as well. So it was easy for me to get a license and get going. And so I had several years of experience as a therapist then, and I've been doing my, as I say, my own version of it ever since. And writing the books. So right now, to me, being a writer is my way of life, and I absolutely love it. I love working with words. I feel that my musical education and my interest in language come together, and so it all worked out for me.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember, and I've had some questions come in, and it was interesting. I think they've seen some of your talks, whether in person or online, and kind of related to sort of when you mentioned your version of therapy. A couple of folks mentioned that they were really taken by, I think, a quote where you said, "You're not interested in helping people get by in the world. You're more interested in helping people connect to more timeless and deeper places." And
Uh,
and I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that might relate to your view of psychotherapy.
well, yeah, we could put together depth psychology and the spiritual traditions. What you get there is not so much problem solving. You don't see life as a problem to be solved. You see that life is something to enter into, and for especially my work with Jung and James Hillman, I was much influenced by the two of them, where we go into a problem, an issue that a person might have, in order to find out who they are and what their psyche, their soul wants, what they're looking for, rather than trying to get rid of the symptoms. And so that's a different way of going, of working. And I like it very much because what you do then is you really arrive at the individual person. You don't try to make them adjust to some idea of what is healthy. You don't adjust to society, which tends to be quite neurotic, as we all know, I think. And it's, to me, it works very well that therapy then becomes a movement toward self-discovery, self-understanding. I am personally very much influenced by very early literature, I mean, ancient literature. So the Greeks, the ancient Greeks really affected me. I love that literature. So I discovered the word therapy first in Plato, 300 BC. He talks about therapy and he says it means either to care or to serve, not to cure and not to heal even, but to care or to serve. And he discusses therapy within the context of developing a religious or a sacred sensibility. Sensibility of the world is something that is sacred, and that life has its infinite depth and value. Within that context, he discusses therapy. And that's how I work. So I don't feel myself really part of the modern tradition of therapy, but I found that when I teach, I used to teach on Cape Cod, for 20 years almost. I taught on Cape Cod. I taught many psychiatrists and therapists of all kinds. And I wasn't teaching them how to be a modern therapist. They'd forget it. They got all that in their training. What I was trying to do is bring this Platonic idea, and from my religious studies background and philosophical background, to enrich and deepen what they were doing. So my practice, my work is primarily then that Platonic style of caring for the soul. So I prefer to use the phrase care of the soul, although psychotherapy, the two Greek words actually mean soul care, soul service, psyche, therapia. So I'm doing psychotherapy when I say in my sense, I mean the Platonic sense that I've been developing over all these many years and trying to make it a real practice, something I can do practically and serve people.
Well, when you say this Platonic idea that and you're teaching people that, are there certain things to give them, I guess, in sort of their toolbox in terms of how they might get started with that and
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and utilize that? What might those be?
Yeah. Do you have a few hours? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. There's a
maybe we
lot.
could pick a few.
There's a lot. I'm doing a whole course now. It takes me a year to explore all these things. So yes, there's so much, but let me just tell you the highlights. Um, so one of the things that's important to me, and I learned from some of my own teachers, is not to make a split between the therapist and client, not to make that division in a very deep way, not to make it very too thick. In other words, this is what I mean, to recognize, first of all, that yourself as a therapist, that you as a therapist are a human being, and don't forget that you have lots of problems yourself,
Hmm.
and that you're trying to get along as much as your clients are. And I don't know if you're like me, but there are moments when I think, boy, I wish I knew as much as my client does, or I had achieved what he or she has done, because I'm not quite there yet. That's a very good attitude to have, as long as it doesn't weaken you or it's not about losing your confidence or your skill. It's just that is an attitude that keeps you from feeling too superior in the work
Hmm.
and feeling I'm the healthy one and you're the poor slob. I'm going to try to help. We try not to do that. The other thing is of that split, when you heal it, when you do something with that split, is to um, rely on and appreciate the wisdom of your client, and to let your client have an opportunity to explore and come up with his or her own solutions and insights. And I find that to be really good, really important. I really try to give as much of an opening as possible for that to happen. So that's one little trick, that I use, not to split the client from therapist. Another one that's really important for me is, I get this mainly from Jung and of course Hillman, and that is I use dreams a great deal, night dreams, for my therapy. Not always. Some people don't care for that, so I don't do it with everybody, but I do it with most of the people that come to me for consulting. And dreams I know can be dismissed easily because they seem a little, a little odd maybe, or a little frilly, but actually the dream, it seems to me, is the one thing that really shows you what's happening in a person. But in order to work with a dream and to use dreams, you have to have a good feeling for metaphor and for images and things like mythology. And for me, it's the spiritual traditions help a lot. Um, One thing I was just thinking of this morning, following Jung, my studies in alchemy helped me, because alchemy does a great deal with the meaning of colors. And when I hear dreams, a lot of people talk about some color as a very significant part of their dream. So I bring in alchemy to help me have an insight into what's going on there. Very often you see mythology. So I've really made a big effort. Many, many years ago, I decided I'm going to become good at images. And I studied mythology. I studied all these systems. I studied the arts, the visual arts too, to try to be really sharp with images, so I have a good storehouse to work with. And I'd recommend that to anybody. Not that you have to do it as fully as I have done, but or people who do it in my style. But you can go a long way with a little bit of work toward working with dreams. To me, they are essential. They're really, they're really, they're really important. Another thing that we do in my studies of the soul, I've written these books on soul, quite a number of them, and I didn't write them off the top of my head. I've done a lot of work. I studied Latin and Greek in my monastic days. And so I often will read a Greek text or a Latin text in order to really get a deep original sense of what's being said. And so along the way there, I've done a lot of reading of people writing about soul over the centuries. And I've noticed that one theme that they keep bringing up and actually write their own books about is friendship. So I use friendship as my model as a therapist. Now, don't misunderstand me. I understand fully that you can't become somebody's friend and help them. That's not what it's about. That's too literal. That's too simple. but we can think more, how would you say, more imagistically, more metaphorically, more subtly, that friendship could be the model of how you interact. So what I do is when I'm with somebody, I think about this, and I really, I don't see myself as this doctor, professional. I like very much that people know me as Thomas More and not doctor, because that's myself, it's me. And so I can be with them and have friendship as a model. It's very rare to become an actual friend with a client, but friendship can be the model, the pattern that I work by. And that introduces soul into the practice. And so I do that in a very subtle way, and it's been important for me. I'm not always trying to use my mind. I'm using my imagination and my heart. I'm with the person, and I'm respecting what they say. I'm rather relaxed. I always try to have some humor in all the work, and very relaxed, and have a kind of conversation where they can bring in their own thoughts and ideas. I'm not the hero. I don't want the hero fantasy in my work. This is something we could do a whole week on. Not to be the hero. So I'm not out there to slay dragons and to conquer problems or symptoms or anything like that. My job is to be with the person in such a way that they discover the depth of their soul. And what I believe in, I don't believe in much, but there's one thing I believe in, and that is that if we can really increase our care of soul, the very essence, the very depth of who we are, symptoms will ease. I don't think you have to go after each little problem in life and try to resolve it sort of mechanically, but rather if you, in a bigger way, work toward the development, the care of a person's soul and spirit, then over time, these symptoms find their way. They get relaxed. So that's my basic approach.
Yeah, so sort of that bigger way, the bigger context. So if somebody was asking here, if somebody came to you and was depressed, quote unquote, whatever that, I guess what would that look like? Sort of the care of the soul type of approach with somebody who maybe is presenting with that, because you could very easily just focus on those specific symptoms, as you mentioned, or maybe you take a different path.
Yeah, the first thing I do with depression is when I ask myself, what is it? Depression is one of these words that it's sort of an abstract word. It's a clinical word that maybe it works, and it works in trying to diagnose somebody, and that's a good thing to do. But once you get past that, I want to find out what you mean by depression. Are you sad? Are you lonely? Are you frustrated? Have you lost a sense of meaning and purpose? Is there something that has gone on that has made you feel like you're in what I have called, and I wrote a book about, a dark night of the soul? Is that what you're going through? Is it that big and that deep? So I find that just by changing the language for depression, it's a good step ahead. It clarifies, first of all, just what's happening. Depression doesn't do it. Yes, I know you can go to the clinical definition if you want, but and that's useful. But for the kind of work I do, which is more soul-directed, psyche-directed, psychotherapy, I keep that in mind, that's what I'm doing. Then for that, I want to know specifically. This is a general principle. We speak in abstractions too much. If we could be more specific about what we're dealing with, I think that would be our first step toward moving into something. The second step would be in your training and in your reflection, developing yourself as a therapist, you can question whether you are positive or whether you have a negative judgment about depression. I mean, depression, let's say sadness, melancholy is part of life. It's part of human life. Can you just go out and slice off parts of human experience because you think it's healthier? or you've been taught that this is a healthy thing to do. I don't think that's legitimate myself. So, so what I do is I ask myself, I talk to myself a lot before going and doing the therapy. I try to train myself. So is there a way that depression, what we call depression, the sadness, the chronic anger, a lot of loneliness, the things that people bring up, can they serve us in some way? Can they be useful even though they're painful and disruptive? Can they still be part of life and do something for us? So one chapter in my book, Care of the Soul, that many people have told me they appreciate is called Gifts of Depression. I get that idea primarily from my studies in medieval and early Renaissance psychology, of all things, and health and medicine, because people there talked about the advantages, some of the things benefits you can get from depression. And I keep that in mind. I'll give you an example. If you have no depression in your life, you might be too light. You don't have weight as a person. Depression or sadness or all these emotions can give you some weight. You know what it's like when you meet somebody who's really lived. And they're not living in some cheerful existence, that seems superficial. They've had experiences that have taken them down, but have given them weight. And you can trust who they are and what they say because of that. So that's what I aim at. And it's not looking for happiness all the time or even relief. Sometimes it might be, can I help this person hold that sadness for a while and be with it? Can we sort it out? That's an alchemical idea, sorting out. Can we sort out this feeling of sadness in terms of personal history and the kinds of emotions, the situations when you feel it, your ideas about it, all of that, sorting out the depressions or the sadness so that it can be appropriated, brought into life and have a place where you aren't overwhelmed by your sadness, but it has a place. You just haven't got rid of it, but now you're not suffering it so much.
Fascinating. I hear from somebody had mentioned here that is this type of work, this soul therapy, coming about because of they've noticed that things like religious institutions, I'm reading here, or other sort of passages or rituals or things in modern society has seemed to kind of melt away, and the onus becomes then comes on the individual, and sort of how does one sort of progress. And I guess is there a bit about that in terms of walking with the person on that journey through this type of therapy, and what does that look like? I know we've been talking about it already, but
yes, I think that we are in a different time. We are in a time when the religions have changed. People often used to go for counseling to a priest or a rabbi or imam or someone who could, in a position to guide them. And I've talked to a lot of these people, the ones I just mentioned, and a lot of them feel rather untrained, uneducated, not adequate, maybe not too confident about doing therapy. They wouldn't call what they do therapy. They might call it counseling. But they feel inadequate about it. I think we're entering a period of time now where people are more on their own. We are on our own more, for sure. And I think generally that's a good thing. Although I lament somewhat the loss of the religious traditions. I understand that most of them got ossified or rigid, and they did a lot of harm in many ways. On the other hand, they have such richness in their background. So I remain in touch with the traditions. And for me, in this modern world, where we are now in contemporary life, I think it's essential that we draw on as many of the traditions as we are able to. For me, I've done a lot of study of several different traditions that have enriched my view of what spirit and soul are all about. And I also feel, by the way, that spirit is part of a human being. And You can't separate spirit and soul. They are distinct, and I'll get into that maybe, but they are distinct. And so as the religions diminish somewhat their power, their place in life, we are left on our own. And I think therapists are probably left with the job now of doing some spiritual direction as well. Now, I know a lot of them don't want to do that, and it's a complicated issue, and maybe they feel they're not trained for it. I also know I've done a lot of work with spiritual directors, and they are trying to become more psychologically astute. I think it can go both ways because spirit and soul are inseparable. And so I think that today, individuals are really left on their own, to a large extent, to resolve some of their issues of meaning and values and feeling okay about their lives and dealing with their problems. That they don't have the institutions there quite as much. They're there, but not with the same presence that they used to have. I wrote a book called The Religion of One's Own. People were a little, maybe didn't quite understand religion there. I mean, in a very deep way, not the old institution, but a way of being in the world where you have some ritual and some contemplation, that sort of thing. So I think that's what we are able to do today. It's a great opportunity today to take care of our spiritual life and our emotional lives together and not separate.
And so if, folks being on their own and sort of this being a great opportunity, some people I'm just reading here now have mentioned they found the subtitle of your upcoming book intriguing, of offering the craft of offering caring conversations. Is the caring conversations part of helping people, sort of walking that path with them? And what do caring conversations look like or mean to you?
Well, caring conversations are what I was saying before. They're a mixture of, to make it simple, heart, imagination, and mind. I think we have to bring our intelligence and our skills to it. So this is great that therapists today usually have to go through rigorous programs of study, and they have to have licensing and that sort of thing. That can get out of hand, and it doesn't always, can't always make us secure that we're getting a really well-trained therapist. But we have that, and that's very good. We need good ideas. My friend Hillman used to say this all the time. We need good, rich ideas. And we don't get those just by doing quantitative studies. That's what I'm saying. I'm reading the Greeks. I'm reading the Greek tragedies. I'm reading Greek philosophers. I know that not everyone who wants to be a therapist will do that, but if you're willing to do a little of that, I think you're better off. You need some good ideas. You need to be, there's another thing I say, don't say that you do therapy, say that you are a therapist. That means that you're a therapist 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You are a therapist. You don't practice therapy. You are a therapist. That means you're this kind of person interested in psyche, the soul, psychotherapist. Keep that etymology of that word in mind. You are a psyche therapist, psychotherapist. And that's a soul, the word means soul. And so it's a very deep thing. And you need good, rich ideas in order to work with a person who's trying to find meaning, not just to mechanically solve a problem or to have some techniques for resolving issues, but to be able to understand the mysteries of what it is to be a human being, love, separation, anger, death, illness, family, home. These are all very complex, very important matters of soul that I think a therapist is going to have to confront in some way. And if you want to work only on the surface all the time, people are not really going to be served by you because their soul will not be evoked in the work. And that's essential.
Great. I had somebody Tony Amick had a question for you, Dr. Moritz. What suggestions might you have for utilizing aspects of your therapeutic approach that you're talking about with somebody maybe who has more severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia, is there a place or space for that, for the therapist to work with someone like that?
Yes, I haven't had a lot of experience in recent years with that, but when I started out, I did. I worked closely with a psychiatrist at a local hospital, and but I applied my thoughts here about caring for the soul with psychotic people, and I found that it was very, very useful and very successful, if you want to put it that way. Very, very helpful for people. And people told me afterwards how relieved they were and how happy they were that we had a different approach. But you see, I wasn't trying to do it alone. In all of this work, like when I used to teach a psychiatrist on Cape Cod, I was there to add a dimension. That's how I felt. Not to supplant and substitute one more theory and another practice of therapy, not at all, but to add this dimension. And you can do your practice with whatever training you've got and your expertise. I respect that tremendously, the expertise that you have. If my family members needed some therapy, I would really want to find an expert, someone who really knows, really been trained in therapy, in the classical therapy. On the other hand, I'd also like to find someone who is a philosopher of sorts, who has thought about things in a deep way and has thought about the meaning of life and how our problems are part of this existential effort to try to find our way toward being who we are, becoming the individual that we are. I really appreciated the work of Rollo May decades ago, because he was what he called himself an existential psychologist and therapist, and he loved to talk about therapy from this more philosophical perspective. And I appreciated that a lot because it was hands-on at the same time it had this deeper approach. However, I find even more satisfaction in the works of Jung and James Hillman.
Yeah, and that brings me to the late great American psychologist James Hillman, who I know was your friend.
Yes.
Could you just share a bit more? I know he's done obviously some fascinating work re-envisioning psychology and all of that. What are some elements, or are there some elements from James Hillman that you incorporate into your work and how you see psychotherapy?
Oh yes, there are all kinds of them. James and I were very close friends. Very close friends. I gave the eulogy at his gravesite, and we talked about that for quite a bit, a long time before his death, and very buddies, really close. So I learned a lot from him firsthand. I love that I learned watching him. He was one of these 24-hour therapists. Was always on. He was never not. We'd go out to dinner. We like to go out to Mexican restaurants quite often. We lived in Dallas, and there wasn't a thing that happened, something that he wouldn't reflect on as soul, as an expression of soul, as psychological. In his sense of that word, psychological meant of the soul. So it was wonderful to learn. I'll tell you at least one idea, maybe two, that I got from him that are essential. And I can think of a couple immediately. One is in his book, Revisioning Psychology, he has a section called Psychological Polytheism, or he wrote an article about that. I remember that was one of the first essays of his I ever read. Psychological polytheism. What he means by that is that a human being has many, many claims on them. A lot of things are going on, like, to put it very simply, let's say that you have maybe you feel you're really called to be a therapist, but if you had another choice, you'd rather be a musician. I guess I'm speaking for myself, but I didn't think of that. So what do you do? Well, you do all of it. You do everything as much as you can. And if you have to only do a small portion of one thing and a big of another, that's fine. You don't have to make it all equal, but you include everything. And so in the same way, you include If you're feeling sad and you're depressed, well, don't think that that's the only thing. Don't let that be the only thing in your life, in your existence. There are other things that have a claim on you. Your sexuality, uh, your um, your anger has a claim on you. Your desire to be social, all of those things, they may conflict with each other. Now, he called it psychological polytheism because he liked to use Greek mythology as his kind of his blueprint for the psyche, for the soul. It's a tradition. It's been going on for centuries to speak of psychology through mythology, through Greek mythology in particular here in the West. So yeah, that's polytheistic. You have all these gods. So, I use that language too, at least for myself. I wouldn't do it for clients much, but once in a while. So I will say that for one person dealing with their sexuality, I might discuss a little bit in a simple way the whole idea of the goddess of sexuality, Aphrodite. I might just, at least think about that for myself and realize that those claims are probably the opposite of this other goddess, Artemis, who is so different, who doesn't want any sexuality, it seems, but and wants to be alone. Don't touch me. That's Artemis. Well, what do you do? How do you end up? Well, you end up with both. And you find that your job, your psychological job for yourself, caring for your soul means having this flexibility and openness, having kind of a breadth of who you are to be able to have these different elements in you, and they don't have to be reconciled. They don't have to be figured out and made into one thing. You can live in the tension of them and the multiplicity of them. So that was an essential idea of Hillman's that has affected me ever since. And I know it's kind of a prerequisite in your work that you're thinking polytheistically, but I think it's a very useful one. One more, I said I'd give you a couple. The other thing I got from Hillman, which a lot of his students pick up on, is he used to use the phrase, go with the symptom. And that's very important to me in my work. You go with the symptom. That means that you don't try to counter the symptom and try to find some opposite thing that you think is better. So if someone comes to you with sadness, saying, "I'm just feeling so sad, and these days, can you help me with that?" You got to be careful not to say, "Okay, I'm going to have to work hard to make this person happy." That would be going against the symptom. What we do in Hillman's approach is you go with the symptom, you stay with that, and you try to get close to that symptom of sadness and see what it is. And what are you really sad about deep down? It may take a while. I think it may take even more than a year, maybe 2 or 3 years to reach the point where you're going through this and you begin slowly at the beginning, and then over time, you begin to get closer and closer to that symptom. And you discover that at the end, it's really, I don't have to feel sad all the time to keep this thing in me. What it might be is that maybe I'm just too light in my approach to life. I haven't taken life seriously enough. And maybe this sadness is bringing me toward my seriousness, again, toward the weight. And so that's an example of, a couple things. I could tell you right now 12 or 15 things, but those are two that I think are very central for me in my work.
Yeah, those are beautiful. I really appreciate those. Those are fascinating to reflect on. So thank you for those. I have a question here, and we don't have a ton more time. So we're starting to get a whole bunch coming in. But Angelique wanted to follow up on what you mentioned about the distinction between soul and spirit. And can you say more about that?
Yes. This is a topic that, again, Hillman wrote about in an essay called Peaks and Veils many years ago. And what he was saying there really stuck with me. It took me a while to figure. I read it about 5 or 6 times before I started getting the point. It wasn't an easy one because I always thought they were the same. But there's a very ancient tradition that soul and spirit are different. Spirit, usually, to generalize a bit, spirit takes us upward and forward. So in spirit, like Hillman said, peaks and veils. You see the mountaintops, like you get 10 commandments on how to live, life reduced to a set of principles that can be very valuable, but that's a very spirit approach. The soul approach is to stay in the valley where things are much more complicated. And you can't have these 10 steps. It's something that you have to be together and have conversations for a few months or so to sort something out. And it's subtle, complex, and the soul is embedded in ordinary life right there in our homes and families and our work and jobs and the things that occupy us every day. That's where the soul is. How important it is to have a home, to be living in the right place, to be close to your family and friends, to eat in a way that is satisfying to your soul as well as your body, to eat in a way where there's pleasure. Pleasure is very important to the soul. Spirit is a little concerned about pleasure. The spirit, in the spirit, we usually are afraid that pleasure might pull us down too far. So we want to be pure, more pure in the spirit, which is fine. The spirit is equally valid and equally valuable to the soul, but they're very different. They're distinct. They need to be close together. In the spirit, we may think about the future, and we think about future worlds and what things will be like and how we're evolving. All of that is so adventurous and moving us forward, has a lot of impetus to it. Soul is sort of sitting in a nice, comfortable chair, reflecting on things and thinking about the past and telling stories of the past. And the therapist talking about a personal history. That's so important in therapy, that soul matter of just having the stories of personal history, not trying to get somewhere with it, not trying to figure somebody out. That's bringing that spirit element into it too much, maybe. But we need a combination, not a balance. There's no balance to be achieved here, but a combination where a life where at moments we can be very spirited and spiritual, and moments when we can be very soulful and in the full complexity of life.
Wow. Okay. I'm writing these down for myself here, Dr. Moore. But I have to say, the go with the symptom, not trying to get somewhere. Boy, those are really powerful insights. I appreciate that. All right, I'm just getting a bit inundated here with questions. Ashley G wanted to know, how do you work with patients on soul work regarding mortality, especially somebody who maybe doesn't believe in the hereafter?
Belief is overrated. I don't think we need belief quite so much as we think. That's a bit of an old-fashioned idea. I think what we need more is imagination about life, death, and afterlife. We need an imagination. Like for me, I'll tell you personally, for me, I love to think of reincarnation as part of my idea of afterlife. I love to think of heaven. I really do. I mean, I grew up a Catholic. That's not going to go away from me at all. I have a beautiful imagination of heaven, and it's real. I don't mean it's a fantasy, loose, light thing. It's very, very deep. It has everything to do with my security and my love of life. So, and I also love the atheist. I remember Hillman told me about maybe a month before he died, he said, I've got to tell you, I can't tell everybody, but I got to tell you, he said, I don't believe there's anything after death. I think this is the end. I'm a materialist when it comes to death. And I thought to myself, he's never been a materialist his whole life, but about this, he's going to be. Well, I'm not there. I differ from him on that. But I respect that. And I think each of us have to be atheistic to some extent. A little bit of atheism helps a lot. It takes away excessive belief and excessive, too much confidence in our faith and our knowledge of things. The great religions have taught, including Christianity, have taught for centuries that little doubt is a good thing, doubt, and that's what I'm trying to say here. A little atheism, I think, is a good thing. Not making that an ideology and a dogma, which some atheists do, but a little bit. I say it's like putting pepper in a casserole. Put a little bit of that dark stuff on it, it tastes good. It completes the dish, but it's only a little sprinkle. So that's how I feel about it. With afterlife and mortality, I explore that with a person. I'm able and very willing to be with them in their imagination. If they want to talk about heaven, I'm right there with them. and I love it. I just really can do it, and I can help maybe deepen their appreciation for it. And I love anything that keeps their hope alive. Hope is so important. And so I think you need some education in all these things. I mean, this is another point that I like to make is if you're training yourself as a therapist, I would recommend reading some of the great spiritual literature. I always read the Tao Te Ching of China. It's so useful. It's short. Each chapter is about 10 lines at most. Read that. One chapter a day will take you 15 seconds. And then a little contemplation about it. The Tao Te Ching, some of the great poems and statements of Rumi from Sufism, tremendous. I personally have translated the Gospels myself because I felt the translations I've been reading, I haven't felt they were very accurate. I did my own translation of the Gospels that are published. And I think reading the Gospels, even now today when I'm far from that life as a monk, but they enrich me and really help me. And spirit and soul go together. So I think, in my view, psychotherapy includes spiritual direction, includes some element of caring for the spirit as well as the soul. You have to do it. I think you just have to, otherwise you're dividing a person too much. And you can train yourself with great pleasure by reading some of these wonderful texts from Judaism and Christianity and Islam and, some of the Greek, wonderful Greek prayers and hymns. Wonderful.
Wow. Well, we are getting close to the end here. Is there anything else that maybe you'd like to just add before we close?
Oh, wow. Well, can I just add to what I was just saying about
Yes.
a few minutes ago about pleasure and tell you where I get this and give you a vision of it. Many, many centuries ago, I mean, way back in time in India, there was a period of time, it's called Vedanta, and the Upanishads come out of that period of time. And in the Upanishads, we get these three words, Sat, Chit, Ananda, that are supposed to be kind of three words to guide your life. Sat meaning being yourself. It's so important to be yourself. If you're a therapist, don't be a copy of somebody else. Be yourself, your whole full self. Really become somebody when you're a therapist, and you will help your client so much by having the fullness of yourself present with them. That's probably more healing than anything in the world. Sat, Chit, Ananda, Sat. Chit means awareness. So be aware, have this incredible awareness of life, of people. You have to read, you have to study, you have to look at art, you have to listen to music in order to have that high degree of awareness of what it means to be a human being. That is so valuable and important. It leads to insight. And the third thing is Ananda, which is most important of all. That means joy or pleasure. And it can be simple pleasure, but very specifically in this Vedanta context, as I understand it, what it means is the deep pleasure you have of being in life the way you yourself as an individual need to be, the law of your own life, the joy of living your own law, not being somebody else's idea of what is good or perfect, the joy of living your own law, your dharma, your logos, your own self, living your life. We get back to that again. And that gives joy, a deep, deep joy. And that's so important for people because when they come to you, they are lacking pleasure and joy usually. And you can find out what's blocking it, or you can model how to be joyful. You have to be in touch with your ananda, your bliss, your pleasure, your joy.
Wow. Thomas, thank you so very much for your time today. I
feel like I'm giving a sermon here. Sorry about that.
No, it was a great way to end. I wish we had more time. I would love to keep this conversation going. But the good news is we will be seeing you hopefully this summer for our conference to talk perhaps more about these things. So thank you again so much for your time. And for everybody who is listening, we will be recording this session, so you will have that available. And then next week, we will also send all of you just some information, a survey, so that you can get your CE certificate if you need that. I know at the beginning, I think we were cut off a little bit, so I'm not sure if you missed anything, but I wanted to thank Charleston Dorchester Mental Health Center, Mental Health Heroes, our Platinum supporter, Low Country Behavioral Health, and Mean Stream Studios for this, our first speaker spotlight series. And obviously, certainly thank you to Dr. Thomas Moore. You can learn more about our conference at lowcountrymhconference.com. Please go take a look at the schedule. We really have a great group of speakers for a special 3-day event. Thank you so much, and take care. The Low Country Mental Health Conference is a fundraising event. The money that we raise for you attending the conference goes directly to clinical care here in the Charleston metro area to address mental health issues.
The setting here is just so amazing and huge, and when you go into the theater, it just feels like a really a big deal.
What differentiates this conference from many others is the quality of the speakers that we have, world-renowned mental health professionals, but also getting unique perspectives from artists, philosophers, again, world-renowned across the globe.
The best experience for me at the conference was probably going in the exhibit hall, where there were, I think, 75 different sponsors and exhibitors that I could network with.
The musical performances were excellent. I had the opportunity to see Edwin McCain pretty close up, and it just moved me to tears. He really connected with the audience. He's a supporter of mental health and shared personal stories, as well as, we all got a break and got to listen to some fabulous music.
I think this conference surprises a lot of people who attend. It's innovative, they're incredible speakers, and we have all of them combined in 2 days. And these are folks that people have read or studied in graduate school.
You should not miss this conference. The quality of the speakers, the venue, the location, it's an excellent experience, one not to be missed.
This conference is a great opportunity to see so many different speakers, be in a great city, great location. You gotta come.
I would definitely come again to this conference. It was fabulous. I'll be here every year.
I absolutely would come again, on my calendar right now.
I would really come again. This is my 4th conference. It gets better every year here in Charleston.
I encourage you not to miss this conference if you're a mental health professional. It is truly a gem here on the East Coast that happens every year here in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. It'll be transformative in terms of your clinical practice and the skills that you'll learn from some of the very best professionals and experts in the field today.